200 people, 0 airports, 1 island. How Americans live 7,000 kilometers from civilization. But here's what nobody talks about. On one of the most isolated American territories on Earth, there is no emergency room, no police dispatcher, no fire department that can reach you in minutes. There are no backup systems, no redundancy, no infrastructure safety net, and yet for generations a community of Americans has built an entire civilization in that void. Not despite the isolation, but because of it. Stay with me, because by the end of this investigation, you'll understand how these people have solved problems that mainlanders didn't even know existed. I want you to think about something for a moment. If you're watching this from the continental United States, you are surrounded by systems, emergency response, supply chains, medical facilities within 30 minutes, courts, banks, schools with standardized curricula, police, fire, ambulances. Every single one of those institutions exists because of proximity and density. Remove proximity and density, and every one of them vanishes. On this island, that isn't theory. It's daily reality. If you live here and you have a heart attack at 3 in the morning, there is no ambulance coming. There is no helicopter. There are no paramedics trained in advanced life support. What you have are your neighbors. What you have is the knowledge passed down through families over more than a century about how to keep people alive when the outside world cannot reach you. If you break your leg, you do not go to an emergency room. You wait, sometimes for weeks, for a supply boat. If that boat is delayed by weather, which is routine, you wait longer. Subscribe to this channel if you want to understand how communities survive in places where the rest of us would panic. I'd love to hear in the comments, what's the farthest you've ever been from a hospital? Have you ever lived somewhere without immediate emergency access? Now hold on, this part requires your full attention for a moment. The true architecture of survival on this island isn't about the geography. It's about something much more subtle, something most documentaries miss entirely. It's about how a small group of people have engineered their entire social structure around the permanent absence of outside help. And if you want to understand the actual mechanisms that hold these communities together, the unwritten rules, the decision-making systems, the economic patterns that emerge from true isolation, I've put together a complete guide that breaks down exactly how this works. You'll find it in the description, and it's also pinned in the comments. It's a paid resource, but frankly, it contains patterns you won't find anywhere else. The Americans living on this island, fewer than 300 in total, have built something that contradicts everything we've been taught about civilization. We're told that more people means better services, that density creates efficiency, that isolation is a form of deprivation. Yet these people eat differently than you do. They consume seafood that most Americans have never tasted, caught from waters that no commercial fleet reaches. They grow food in volcanic soil that produces crops with a mineral density you cannot buy in a supermarket. They have less, in the conventional sense, and yet their relationship to sustenance is more direct and more assured than most of us will ever experience. The economy here operates on principles that would horrify a conventional economist. There is no speculative investment. There are no mortgage-backed securities or stock portfolios. There is no cryptocurrency. The wealth that matters, fresh fish, preserved meat, stored vegetables, fuel reserves, tools that can be repaired, these are what people actually count. And because the supply chain is fragile and unpredictable, people do not acquire things casually. Every purchase is considered. Every tool is maintained. Nothing is disposed of lightly. This is a place where planned obsolescence has no meaning. A boat engine that breaks down must be fixed, not replaced. A fishing net must be mended. A roof must be maintained. The skills that our ancestors needed, repair, improvisation, adaptation, are not nostalgic here. They are essential. Children learn them as naturally as they learn to walk because survival depends on understanding how things work. The population structure of this community tells an unexpected story. Unlike most aging American communities that are slowly hollowing out, this one maintains a relatively stable age distribution. Young people do not universally leave. Some do, certainly, but others stay. Others return. Why would someone choose to live in a place with 0 airports, where leaving requires 6 days at sea? The answer reveals something fundamental about what people actually need to feel like their lives have meaning, and that insight, the real reason people stay in places that seem impossible, that is where this investigation leads next. Staying means something different when leaving is genuinely difficult. When your neighbor is someone you have known your entire life. when the person who fixed your roof last year is the same person who taught you to fish at age 7. Social bonds in isolated communities are not abstract. They are structural. They hold the place together the way concrete holds a foundation. One resident, James, spent 15 years working on the mainland. He had a steady job, a modern apartment, access to everything. He could walk to restaurants. He could catch any flight. He chose to return anyway. His family had lived on the island for 4 generations. His daughter asked him one evening why he wanted to come back to somewhere so remote. His answer was simple: because when my father died, 300 people came to the funeral. 300. Not to be seen. Not because they felt obligated. They came because he mattered to each of them. That calculus does not appear on any cost-benefit analysis. No economist has a formula for it, yet it drives the actual decisions people make about where to root their lives. The economy here operates on principles that would baffle most mainland Americans. There is no stock market. There is no real estate speculation. You own land because your family has owned it, or because the community collectively decides you should. When a house becomes available, it does not go to the highest bidder. It goes to someone the community believes will be a good neighbor. Work is different too. Fishing remains the backbone, but fishing is not individual enterprise. The catch is shared according to need and contribution. A widow with 2 children gets enough. A young man training to become a better fisherman gets what he needs to learn. The system is not charity, it is pragmatism. If everyone eats, everyone works tomorrow. Tourism brings some money. Researchers come. Travelers arrive by boat, stay a few days, spend money on lodging and food. This generates cash that allows people to buy fuel, parts, goods from the outside. But tourism is managed. No one wants an airport. No one wants a cruise ship port. The community has rejected development proposals that would have brought significant external wealth because they understood something crucial. Rapid money fundamentally changes social structure. Before we continue, I need to be direct about something. This entire investigation, how remote island communities actually function, what holds them together economically and socially, why people choose these lives, demands deeper understanding than a video can provide. That is why I have put together a complete resource guide that breaks down the economic systems, the social mechanics, and the historical forces that created these patterns. It covers everything from subsistence fishing networks to governance structures to migration patterns. You will find it linked in the description and in the pinned comment. It is a paid guide, and frankly, it contains the kind of granular detail that changes how you understand remote community economics. Children here receive education through a school operated by the Island Council. Teachers are community members who have spent years on the mainland getting trained. Distance learning supplements in-person instruction. The curriculum includes practical skills, boat maintenance, fishing technique, food preservation, alongside mathematics, literature, and history. A teenager might spend the morning studying colonial history, then the afternoon learning how to repair an engine. Healthcare works similarly. A small clinic exists. For serious emergencies, patients must be evacuated by ship. This takes days. Everyone knows this. It shapes behavior. People think differently about risk when a broken leg might require a 6-day ocean voyage to reach a hospital. Prevention becomes a cultural value, not a preference. The rhythm of life follows the ocean and the seasons rather than a calendar. Winter storms make fishing impossible for weeks. Food stores must sustain the community. Spring brings calmer waters and preparation for the more abundant months. Autumn is harvest time for the crops that grow in the island's microclimate. Summer means the arrival of visitors and researchers. Communication with the outside world happens through a single satellite connection. The signal is unreliable. News arrives delayed. Sometimes you learn about a major world event weeks after it happens. This creates a peculiar form of psychological distance. You are geographically far, but you are also temporally disconnected. Events that dominate mainland news cycles feel remote and abstract here. The concerns that matter are immediate and local. The weather forecast for tomorrow, whether the catch will be good, if someone's child is sick. This disconnection is not chosen out of isolation preference. It is imposed by geography. Yet over generations, communities adapt to these constraints. Adaptation becomes culture. Culture becomes identity. Eventually, people stop thinking of the constraint as limitation. They think of it as normal. That adaptation shows itself most clearly in how people work. On this island, there is no division between labor and survival. They are the same thing. Fishing remains the primary income source. The waters surrounding the territory hold rock lobster, crayfish, and various white fish species. Export of these catches generates revenue that funds imports of fuel, food, and supplies the island cannot produce locally. One fishing season can determine whether the next year feels secure or strained. The boats are modest, fiberglass hulls, diesel engines, basic navigation equipment. Captains know these waters intimately, reading weather patterns and swells with the kind of intuition that comes only from decades of experience. A bad storm can mean weeks without fishing. Equipment breaks, and replacement parts must arrive by ship. There are no marinas here, no supply stores with shelves stocked with what you need. You maintain your vessel carefully, because failure is not an inconvenience. It is a threat to livelihood. Women work in the fish processing plant. They clean, fillet, and pack the catch for export. It is repetitive work, demanding and cold. The processing facility operates on the rhythm of the catch. When boats return, the work intensifies. When the ocean is too rough to fish, the facility sits quiet. Employment is irregular, tied entirely to conditions at sea. Other employment comes through government positions. Teachers, administrators, healthcare workers, maintenance staff. The government employs roughly 1/4 of the working population. Salaries are modest by mainland standards but adequate for the cost of living here. There is no private sector, no corporate offices, no startups. There is government, fishing, and subsistence agriculture. That is the economy. Hold on, I need you to absorb something crucial for a moment. The economics of life here operate on principles completely foreign to how most of you reading this think about employment and income. This is precisely why our complete resource guide on island economies, the one that maps out how these territories survive financially when they have almost no natural resources to export, sits in the description and the pinned comment below. It breaks down the mechanisms that keep these communities functioning when traditional economic models would predict immediate collapse. If you want to understand not just this island but all of America's forgotten territories, that guide is where the real details emerge. Agriculture exists, but it is small scale. Potato crops grow in the volcanic soil. Cattle graze on hillsides. Sheep and goats provide meat and wool. Vegetable gardens surround homes. These are not farms designed for export or profit. They are insurance. They ensure that if fishing fails and supply ships are delayed, people still eat. The knowledge of how to grow food in this climate passes down through families. Grandmothers teach children which crops survive the wind, how deep to plant, when the soil is ready. Housing reflects the island's constraints. Most homes are built from timber and stone, constructed to withstand wind and salt spray. Interiors are modest. Electricity comes from a combination of diesel generators and, increasingly, wind turbines. Fresh water is captured from rainfall and stored in cisterns. Sanitation systems operate independently because there is no centralized municipal infrastructure. Each household manages its own water and waste. Self-sufficiency is not a lifestyle choice. It is infrastructure. Education follows a standard but small curriculum. The school serves roughly 100 students across all grades. Teachers are either born on the island or recruited from elsewhere and brought in for contracts lasting several years. Leaving for secondary or higher education means leaving. Most young people depart for university in South Africa, Australia, or New Zealand. Some return as adults, others do not. The school photographs on the walls show faces that grew up here and are now gone, scattered across the world. The oldest residents remember when the island felt truly cut off. They remember pre-satellite communication, when letters took months to arrive. They remember when contact with the outside happened only through ships that appeared 2 or 3 times per year. The acceleration of connection, even the limited connection available now, feels recent and strange to them. Younger residents have never known that total isolation. They grew up with satellite internet, email, and occasional phone calls. Their sense of remoteness is different, less absolute, but the feeling persists. No matter how much technology arrives, you cannot ignore the geography. You live 2,000 kilometers from the nearest neighbor. That fact structures everything. The satellite connection that arrived in the late 1990s changed the rhythm of island life, but it did not erase the fundamental constraint. Email could travel at the speed of light, but a person still needed 6 to 10 days on a ship to reach the mainland. Information moved differently than bodies. News arrived instantly. People moved like geology. This created a peculiar kind of modern existence. Someone could video call a family member in California in real time, watching their face on a screen. Then they would walk outside and remember that no commercial flight existed to carry them there. The technology of connection and the reality of separation occupied the same space. Both were true simultaneously. Young people who grew up with this paradox learned to navigate it. They attended university on the mainland, studied abroad, built careers in other places. Then many came home. The island pulled them back. Family stayed. Culture stayed. The landscape itself seemed to exert a gravitational force. Some residents describe it as homesickness that never fully leaves, even when you are standing on the island itself. Economic opportunity remained limited. The fishing industry provided the backbone of employment, but it was not enough for everyone. Some people worked in administration, in education, in small businesses. Government jobs existed but were few. The unemployment rate on U.S. territories like this one fluctuates, but it consistently remains higher than the American mainland average. Younger people with education and skills faced a choice: stay poor or leave. Those who stayed often did so for reasons that transcended economics. They had roots here that ran deeper than salary calculations. Extended family networks meant something different on a small island. Everyone was connected by blood or marriage or both. To leave meant leaving behind not just a place but a web of kinship obligations and belonging that could not easily be replicated elsewhere. Before we move forward, I need you to understand something crucial about how isolation actually functions in places like this. It is not simply the absence of airports or the distance from civilization. Isolation operates as a social force, a cultural current running underneath daily decisions. It shapes whom you marry, where you work, how you raise your children, what futures seem possible, and what dreams feel foolish. This is the underlying mechanism that most outsiders completely miss. And if you want to grasp how people genuinely live in these territories, you need to understand this framework in detail. Our complete guide, the ebook available in the description and in the pinned comment, breaks down exactly how geographic isolation creates these hidden social patterns. It is a paid resource, but it will show you the signals to recognize this dynamic everywhere you look in remote communities. Marriages often happened between families who had lived on the island for generations. Dating options were limited. A young person might have known their eventual spouse since childhood, watched them grow up through school, understood their family history intimately. Romance carried different weight when it carried the weight of community continuity. Children born on the island faced questions about their future that mainland children never confronted. Would they stay? Would they leave for education and never return? Would they return but feel like outsiders, changed by their years away? Many families experience this cycle repeatedly. A child left for high school on the mainland, then university, then work. Years passed. The island changed. The person changed. Coming home meant returning to a place that was no longer quite the same, and being a person who was no longer quite the same. The friction between those two kinds of change could be painful. Yet return migration happened regularly. People came back to raise families, to care for aging parents, to reconnect with something they had lost. The island exercised a pull on its own people. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was genuine preference. Maybe it was the recognition that life in larger, more connected places came with its own forms of isolation. The isolation of anonymity, of unlimited choice, of not knowing your neighbors. The small island offered something different, the isolation of geography paired with the intimacy of community. Both were true, both were felt. Older residents who had lived through the transition from complete isolation to partial connection occupied a unique position. They remembered how things had been and witnessed how things were becoming. They held in their minds two different experiences of the same place. Some welcomed the changes, others felt ambivalent. A few genuinely mourned what had been lost, even as they recognized the practical benefits of satellite internet and occasional supply ships. The photographs told their own story. A man in his 70s named Samuel kept albums stacked in a small wooden cabinet. The images showed the settlement as it existed in the 1970s. Fewer buildings, no electricity lines, boats pulled onto the beach using rope and muscle alone. When he looked at those photos now, something shifted in his expression, recognition and distance at once. "We did not complain then," Samuel said simply, his voice steady but layered with something harder to name. "We knew what we had. Now people complain about the internet being slow." The observation was not delivered with anger. It was more like the observation of someone who had watched a fundamental transformation occur and was still processing its meaning. The arrival of technology had not made life easier in every way, even if it had made certain things possible. The young woman who could now video call her cousin on the mainland did not experience that call as purely positive. It heightened her awareness of what she was missing. Presence and absence became confused. The infrastructure that connected the island to the outside world also made the island's vulnerability more visible. A broken cable meant not just inconvenience but sudden awareness of how dependent things had become. The younger people, those born after the first satellite connection arrived, took the technology for granted in a way their parents' generation could not. It was simply the background of existence. But when it failed, the shock was sometimes profound. One woman who worked in the small administrative office, Maria, experienced this acutely during a storm that lasted 3 days. The satellite link went down, emails stopped, the phone system became intermittent. She found herself suddenly unable to access information that she had relied on for her job. But something unexpected happened during those 3 days. People spent more time together. Conversations happened in hallways that would normally have been occupied by people looking at screens. I realized I had forgotten how to be bored, Maria said afterward. Or maybe just how to be present, without filling every moment with something. Before we continue, I need to pause here because this particular pattern, the collision between isolation and connection, between community and individual access to elsewhere, forms the actual architecture of life in these remote American territories. It is not simply about internet speed or supply ship schedules. It is about identity itself, and the deeper mechanisms of how this works, how communities navigate this tension, how people make daily choices about whether to engage with or pull back from the outside world. All of that is explained in comprehensive detail in our full guide, available in the description and in the pinned comment. The guide breaks down the decision-making frameworks that shape these communities from the inside. The young people occupied the strangest position of all. They had grown up with access to global culture through screens, yet they lived in a place where global culture had not actually arrived. They could watch videos about New York or Tokyo or London, could see what life looked like in cities of millions, could read about career opportunities and universities and social scenes that existed nowhere on this island. And then they had to choose, stay or leave. The leaving was not always permanent. Some went for education and returned, others left and never came back, except for brief visits during holidays when the supply ship brought packages and mail. A few left and found themselves unable to adjust to mainland life, returning after months or years with a new understanding of what home actually meant. Isaac, who left at 19 to study engineering on the mainland, returned after 5 years. He could have stayed. He had job offers. He had an apartment. He had built a life in a city where people actually needed engineers. "I missed not being known," he said. "I missed the ocean being the same ocean every day. I missed knowing that if something happened, there were people I could depend on." The irony was not lost on him. He had escaped the claustrophobia of a small island community and found himself craving exactly that. Not because the mainland was hostile or unwelcoming, but because anonymity, however much freedom it offered, was its own form of loneliness. The economy that sustained the settlement remained rooted in practices that predated satellite technology by generations. Fishing was still the primary source of food and income. The techniques had evolved. Boats now had GPS, engines, radio communication. But the relationship between people and ocean remained fundamentally unchanged. You went out, you worked, you came back. Weather determined everything. A fisherman named Thomas, 63, had spent his entire life on these waters. His father had fished, his grandfather had fished. 3 of his 4 children had chosen different lives, but his youngest son still worked alongside him most days. "The ocean teaches you something about time that no screen can teach," Thomas said as he mended nets. "You cannot negotiate with waves. You cannot make them load faster. You cannot ask them to wait." It was philosophy disguised as practical observation. But the observation held. Life structured around work and weather and immediate physical reality created a different relationship to urgency than life structured around notifications and updates and the constant pressure to respond. Thomas pulled the nets up one final time that day. His son worked the other side, matching his rhythm without speaking. The sun dropped lower, turning the water copper and gold. Around them, the channel emptied. Other boats turned toward shore. "You want to know the real secret of living out here?" Thomas said, coiling rope with practiced hands. It is not about being tough or brave or isolated from the world. Those things help, sure. But the real thing, the thing that keeps people here across generations, is that the work means something immediately. You see the result. You feed your family, you fix the boat, you prepare for tomorrow. There is no distance between effort and outcome. This was the revelation promised at the beginning. These 200 people do not stay on this island, 7,000 kilometers from the mainland civilization most Americans take for granted, because they are trapped, or because they lack ambition, or because they have given up on connection to the wider world. They stay because the rhythms of this place offer something that modern life, for all its convenience and speed, has largely erased. Certainty. Consequence. Meaning that arrives not as abstraction but as physical, immediate, undeniable fact. A nurse tending a patient knows exactly what her work accomplished. A child raised in a community of 200 knows every adult who shapes their life. A fisherman watches the fish he caught feed the people he knows. The teacher sees the same students year after year, tracking their growth not through metrics but through presence. The mechanic repairs the one boat that everyone depends on, and everyone knows it. Work and consequence are not separated by layers of bureaucracy or abstraction or global supply chains. This does not mean life here is simple or pastoral or free from struggle. The weather still kills. The isolation still brings loneliness. The lack of economic opportunity still pushes young people away. Illness in a place with limited medical facilities carries real danger. Storms arrive with genuine menace. But what these 200 people have built, across generations, is a society where the connection between person and consequence remains unbroken. Where contribution is visible, where community is not an abstract concept but a requirement for survival. Where your place matters because it actually matters. Not theoretically but physically, daily, in ways you cannot ignore or optimize away. Most Americans will never live here. The vast majority will never even visit. The island sits too far from everything, too difficult to reach, too far removed from the economic and social currents that define modern life. But the existence of this place, and the 200 people who have chosen to remain, offers something worth considering. In a world obsessed with scale and efficiency and connection across infinite distance, a community that cannot be scaled, cannot be optimized, and remains fundamentally bounded by geography, reminds us that another way of living existed. Another way of living exists still. It is not for everyone. It was never meant to be. But it persists, and the people who inhabit it speak a different language about work and time and what it means to build a life that matters. That language is worth listening to, even if we never learn to speak it ourselves. This island, and the lives being lived on it right now, exists as a kind of mirror. It shows us what we have gained through technology and connection and the dissolution of geographic boundaries. But it also, quietly and without judgment, shows us what we have traded away. That recognition, that pause, that moment of seeing clearly, this is perhaps the greatest gift these 200 Americans offer to the rest of us. Subscribe to this channel if these stories of isolated lives and overlooked territories speak to you. Leave a comment below with your own experience of what it means to feel genuinely connected to a place, whether that is a small town, a neighborhood, or somewhere else entirely, and enable notifications so you never miss a new documentary as we continue exploring the shores America forgot and the people who call them home.